Now that we know how to make curves and how to adjust them, let's talk about some of my favorite uses for them. Starters, in this video, I'd like to talk about create sweep mesh. And this takes the curve and turns it into a tube, which has all kinds of uses. The default shape for the tube is just a circle, which you can adjust how many sides it has, make it rounder or less round. By default, it's set to 8. There's also the option to turn it into a star shape, which I'll be honest, I don't make much use of myself, but it's there if you want to. You adjust the inner radius of the star shape. I'll set that back to regular circle. There's also the rectangle, which is roughly square shaped with rounded corners. You control the width and the height, as well as how rounded the corners are, how many segments are in the corners. Change the depth of the corners so you can actually make them go inwards like that if you wanted to. Make a little plus sign, I guess. You can use the line option. This is useful if you're trying to make polygon hair on a character. Also, the arc can be useful for that kind of thing as well. Show how big of an arc it has, drawing it all the way around. How many segments are in it, of course. A wave, similar kind of situation if you want some wiggly, wavy hair. And then there's the custom. Now, the custom, you can pick other objects to be the shape of the tube. So if I made a circle real quick and adjusted that, now that is the shape of my sweep mesh. Or if I used a plane, for instance, something like this, set that to poly object and select that. Now that is the shape. You can also select individual polygon faces or edges. If I wanted to do specifically that one right there, or I want to do the edges, and I selected specific edges on this, it would do that instead. It's making a bit of a mess though, but that is your option. Delete both of these, I think. Cancel that. Set that back to a poly circle. Let's see what else we can do with the sweep tool. You can also turn on the cap, but I usually don't just because it creates end guns, and I'm pretty sure I've already talked about end guns. Distribution. Turn that on, and I get an array of tubes instead of just a single one. Control how it's arrayed around it. In a straight line. Try to put in a square. Okay, see that? Usually leave it radial, so it's a nice little circle. Control how many of them there are. Control how thick each one is individually. And rotate them around their own pivots. And control how much of this circle is being covered by the different tubes. Turn on alignment. Lets me control how this tube is aligned to the inner curve inside of it. So if I set this to left, it'll be the left side of the curve. I can just barely make out the curve right here. There it is. The right, the center, the top, the bottom, the center back again. You can also just adjust it slightly here. Back and forth, different directions. Turn that back off. The scale profile is for the entire thing. This is also still affecting it when you have the distribute turned on. So you can see how that affects this. I have instances fully cover it, and I can adjust this. Rotate profile. Well, I'll turn that back on again. If I do the rotate profile, I'll rotate the entire thing instead of just the individuals. twist. We'll twist just one end of it. I get kind of a spiral in it. Once again, I like to see how this looks to distribute because that looks really cool, I think. A lot more obvious what's going on in this case. You can also type in a higher number if you want to really make it twisted. That might be a bit much. Yeah. Let's set that back to 0, I think. That's a bit too much. Taper allows you to make one end thicker or thinner. So you have it taper off to a little point. Below taper, though, is taper curve. If I open this up, I get this little curve option right here. I can create a curve for how I want this to taper along the length of it, from beginning here to end there. I can just click inside of it somewhere. I can say, well, I don't want it to start tapering until the very, very end. So I keep it thicker. Oh, wait, I still have taper turned on right here. There we go. And make it stay thick all the way to the very, very end, or I can have it thin out random places inside. If I want to get rid of these, I can just click the little X on the bottom. That gets rid of that. Oh, also interpolation, linear. If it's smooth, I want this to be a rounder curve right there. This controls how it interpolates between the different points along the curve. I'll leave that alone for the time being. Interpolation down here. And they're both called interpolation. This controls, this one is different from this one. Just reuse the word, I guess. But this interpolation controls how it places the perpendicular edges and go around it. So the basic mode is precision, and that tries to add them in to get the best shape it can, depending on the precision you have it set to. The lower the precision, the less accurate it is to the shape of the curve. But the higher it is, the more accurate it is, and the more edges you have to worry about. There's also start to end, which you just tell it how many individual edges you want from beginning to end. That can get a little rough in places where there's a sharp curve here and a smooth curve here, because it's got the same amount of edges no matter what the curve looks like. And sometimes you want to have more curves in places like this, which is where things like precision comes in handy. Because we'll try to add them in here to try to keep the shape as best as it can. And there's EP to EP. And what that means is, remember from when we talked about the curves before, right-click edge point. Each one of these are edge points. And this says I want to have 50 steps between each edge point, which is why if there's more edge points between here and here, there's going to be 50 right there, then 50 between a much larger area. And there's a bigger gap here. There's going to be 50 between that gap right there. So it's a little complex as to where these edges are being distributed. And distance is just the distance between each one of them. So I set this to the minimum of 0.5 units between each edge. It's going to be the same distribution all along the length of this, whether it needs it or not. Now, for all of these, you can turn on Optimize, and it'll try to clear out the ones that it doesn't think are being useful. You see how that one got rid of a bunch from over here, and it kept some in between. Bring up my precision really high, it'll try to only add the ones that it thinks are doing something. I don't tend to worry so much about the rest of the settings on here. I get all the shape from these controls up here. And just to demonstrate from the necklace we made in the last video, when I create this curve right here around the neck, if I go to create sweep mesh, I can now create a curve around that. I set this to a line. So you don't want top or bottom. There we go. And now it fits perfectly around the neck. So I'm a huge fan of the sweep mesh tool. One of my favorite things about it is the fact that if I go to my UV editor, the UVs are already done. It's just a pipe. So it's just a straight line pretty much. It makes it really easy to texture these things. And my favorite use for them is I'm doing robots like Optimus Prime here, the Transformer. What I do is I make a complicated shell that gives them the look of the outside of the robot, but inside I just fill it with twisting tubes So it looks like there's stuff going on inside of him, even though I didn't do anything inside there at all. Even go through the empty spots inside the legs. He's hollow everywhere, except I've filled him with these tubes. As that makes him look solid, even though I truthfully did the bare minimum amount of effort to make him work. You see, they all gather together up into his neck right there. Kind of like faking muscles on him. Right. That is the sweep mesh tool. I love the sweep mesh tool. It was one of the most exciting things I ever added to Maya in a long time, and I hope you find good uses